right. I am now joined, not quite for the first time ever, but it's a rare occurrence, by our super producer Jake Abbott, um, union organizer by day. Although I guess now I should say graduate student by day. Um,
Yeah, I thought the best way to make change in the world was to quit being a union organizer and start studying fiction in grad school. So I
no,
just
that,
went for it. That's my theory of change. It's good art can change the world.
no, that makes sense. Yeah,
Yeah,
no, it's much less important the way we organize working class than that. Like you spent a lot of time, thinking about literary criticism, a lot of time
yeah,
thinking about how to construct, a good scene. So yeah, good priorities. That's, but but in any case, Jake also, most people don't know this, is a world-renowned Talmudic scholar. Which the reason most people don't know that is that's not true. But he did say that he wanted to watch one of the ones where Hitchens debates a rabbi, and so for that purpose, I'm going to pretend that Jake is a world expert at everything pertaining to Judaism.
yeah. And I just know it's hard for you to find Jewish guests. You know what I mean?
That's
So I figured I would fill in because I'm one of the rare Jews that personally, and that would be interested in Marxism or Christopher Hitchens. So I'm happy to fill in.
no, that's true. That's true. It's very. I think actually, if there's one thing that gives them an argument doesn't have enough of, it's uh, it's guests who are like male Jews between like the ages of like 25 and 45. I think there was I think there was a time when I had Eric Levitz and Daddy Bessner on at the same time, and I think there was an extended discussion of like which neighborhoods in Brooklyn everybody's like grandparents had
and
lived
and
in. So
and the sad thing is that I know Eric Levitz well. It's like that's how insular we're getting. He's a close friend. That's
all right. Well, we'll find we'll liberalize our rules and allow an Italian to be a guest at some point in the future. But but yeah, actually, so I should say before we get started, we do actually know. We do actually know some other kinds of people. So we are going to have Nando Vila, who's a Spaniard, and Anna Kasparian, who's a Armenian American. And I'm not just going to start, listing off everybody's ethno-religious backgrounds.
there's this new thing called identity politics, and it's very great. It's chef's kiss. It sorts
Yeah,
people up very logically into different
yeah.
subcategories, and it helps me understand the world. So
No, that's
it's
good.
cool.
That's good. That is exactly what you wanted. It's actually funny. I just got back from a trip, and while I was on the plane back, I finished reading Adolph Reed's book, The South, Jim
Mhm.
Crow and Its Afterlives, and there's a section, there's a part of that book, right, where he's talking about the phenomenon of like passing under Jim Crow and the way there are all these sort of like literary narratives and stuff about it that are sort of all about how you're like denying, this sort of
Mhm.
the your racial essence or whatever, that they like that's like sort of seen as dishonorable. And in any case, he has an extended discussion about it that has all the virtues that Adolph's writing usually has.
Mhm.
But there's a point where he just kind of pauses, like, okay, but like, we know this is all bullshit, right? I mean, like, there's no, like, you aren't actually like, really and truly anything, right? I mean, this is just some stuff we made up to classify people to decide who got slotted into to which parts of this apartheid system. But Anyway, definitely my favorite Adolf to read about race. There should far superior to the one who's probably still has better sales historically, but um, but yeah. So all those people that I just mentioned, Anna Kasparian, Nando Vila, Derek Varn, who I believe while we still got our calipers out, I believe he's half Jewish. But et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Lots of those people are going to be joining us in Los Angeles on October 23rd at 7 p.m. at the Terragram Ballroom. Doors open at 6. We're also selling VIP tickets to meet and greet, so that's. And of course, that's also going to be me and Matt Leck and David Griscom and Jason Miles and Kuba, unpronounceable Polish last name, because all of those people and more are going to be at the Give Them an Argument / This Is Revolution / Left Reckoning live show in Los Angeles on October 23rd. Tickets are available on Ticketmaster. I think I've not gotten into the habit yet of sticking it into the descriptions for everything when we create the YouTube links, but I'm going to start going back through and putting it in. And yeah, I'm excited about this.
Yeah, I would have been there if it weren't for grad school wages, which is none. But definitely the event in New York that wasn't quite this, but the Sublation magazine launch I went to that. That was super fun. So I'd recommend everyone heading out to LA, and hopefully we'll be able to do one on the East Coast sometime, and I'll pop in.
Yeah, I hope so. I think maybe very soon. There are actually some possibilities being talked about that way. And yeah, this is true. Nando and Anna are returning champion category, not only in that they've been, they've both been guests several times on Give Them an Argument, but also that in a sense, right, this is this is going to be a little bit of a reunion of from the TMBS live show in Los Angeles, before the pandemic. So yeah, should be a very good time. But let's go back in time now to when. Do you know exactly when this debate was? Christopher Hitchens and David Wolpe. So it's got to be at least 2007, because that's when God Is Not Great came out, and he really started these debate tours where with priests and pastors and rabbis. In the aftermath of that, and can't be any later than 2011 because that's when he died. So we've at least narrowed down to a 4-year period. But yeah, we've if nothing else, we've watched Hitchens debate Catholics and Protestants on here, but this is I think. Ironically enough, given the disproportion of the guest list, I believe this is the first one that he's debated religious stuff with a Jewish interlocutor we've seen.
Yeah, and let me double check with you because I pulled up the link that this was the one you were thinking of, because I think they debated multiple times, but this is Christopher Hitchens versus Rabbi David Wolpe, the Great God Debate. Is that the one?
Yep, that's the one.
All right, great then. Yeah, let's check it out. I know that David, the rabbi, looked back very fondly on his times debating Hitchens. I'm going to share this, but I found an excerpt of an article that he wrote that people might want to check out. So I guess I'm assuming it doesn't get too acrimonious, or if it does, then David Wolpe enjoyed how acrimonious it got. But I do have a quote if you'll give me the liberty of reading it from David Wolpe, and this is from a longer article. But he said of Hitchens, his throat clearing was like the unbuttoning of a stripper's overcoat, promising delights to come. Rabbi David Wolpe on Christopher Hitchens.
Yeah, that's good. So I want everybody. That primes us all to to imagine the delights to come. To imagine late 2000s dumpy middle-aged Christopher Hitchens gyrating on a pole whenever he starts to clear his throat in this debate. So thank you for that.
Just imagine that the Rabbi David Wolpe is very horny during this debate whenever Christopher clears his throat. But should we get into it with some of those mental images?
Let's do it.
Good evening. Thanks for being here on such a wretched night. And what a big turnout. We've busted right out of the temple tonight. I'm a little intimidated with America's rabbi and the God Slayer, Chris Hitchens, right here. Maybe you should be a little intimidated in this community. For all you know, I'm the son of snake handlers and primitive Baptists. In fact, I am. So we'll see what happens here. I hope that doesn't mean a prejudice in this debate. I made a mistake with my third child. I waited until she could speak to have her baptized. And when the baptism, water on head. And when the preacher, got the water with the droplets and began to put on her head, and he said it was in the name of God, and she said, "What is God?" Let's just do it. Let's start with the simplicity of a child. What is God, Rabbi?
Well, it depends who you're answering. If you're answering a 2-year-old, you answer one way. But if you're discussing it with an adult, you begin with a recognition, which actually the entire debate should be framed with, of human limitation. In the following sense, when you were 2 years old, could you imagine what it's like to be an adult? Of course not. A 2-year-old has no idea what an adult is like. And yet we make definitive statements about God all the time when in every religion that I know of, the distance between God and human beings is infinitely greater than the distance between an adult and a 2-year-old. So when I say, as I'm going to in a second, I'm not going to avoid your question, but understand that I say it against the background of a religious recognition of our own inability to understand that which is infinitely greater than ourselves. My thumbnail definition of what God is that God is the source of everything that exists, and God is someone, something with whom a human being can have a relationship, and that you can live your life in alignment with a godly purpose. But any definition that is greater than that is in some ways to traduce God, which is why, by the way, the title of Christopher's book is exactly right. God is not great. Because to say God is great or God is something is to put a definition on God, which we know from classical Jewish philosophy you ought not to do. So in fact, Christopher's exactly right, and we can wrap it up right now.
Thank you very much for coming. It's been a wonderful evening. Yes. Apologies perhaps to Muslims in the audience who say God is great all the time. We'll circle back. Okay. Chris Hedges, to you. Answer my daughter's question. Maybe you'll warn her off.
If you don't mind, it would be Christopher and Hitchens.
Yes, sir.
Chris Hedges is a horrible...
Hedges? Did I say
Yes,
Hedges?
you did.
Forgive me.
Chris Hedges is a horrible apologist for liberation.
Christopher Hitchens.
That's better.
Too many guests, too little time.
Sorry, but I exist too, if you see what I mean.
Yes, yes.
May as well start by establishing that ontological claim. Well, Friedrich Nietzsche famously said that God was dead, and Sigmund Freud can be rendered as having said that God was dad. And I think both of them are probably right. The concept of God is like everything else in our vocabulary, man-made. It's an invention of human beings. Unless you take the view that God made us, in which case it'd be a lot to explain. Why did we in that case make so many gods? It does seem to be very much more probable that men and women made many gods than that any one God made all men and women and the rest of creation. And as well as being man-made, it's fear-made. It is the unexpressed or partially expressed wish for a protector, a parent, someone who will never desert you, someone who will do in a way you're thinking for you, especially on questions of moral philosophy. At its best, it's that. It's a wish to be loved more than you probably deserve. And at its worst, it's the underdeveloped part of the human psyche that leads to totalitarianism, that wants to worship and that wants a boss. that wants a celestial dictatorship. And that's the bit that's now threatening to destroy our secular civilization. And so you're quite right to start where you do. It used to be believed, I mean, the number of gods now it's infinite, and a new god is created almost every day by some cult or other. But it used to be that there was a belief that gods were in the trees, in the woods, in the springs, in the sea, in the clouds, and so forth. Polytheism of a kind. Then something a bit more polytheistic, like Olympus, where there was at least a location for the divine, but it was multifaceted. And then monotheism, getting it down to one. So I regard this as progress of a sort, because they're getting nearer the true figure all the time.
I actually,
Rabbi, yes, progress, maybe.
Which is why, which by the way is why the Vatican, in its old days, was very upset by the concept of zero. Didn't like zero at all, the most important number of all, the number without which you can't do anything, which wasn't there in Roman numerals.
no, it was invented in Islamic civilization.
And unfortunately,
actually.
also struck them as a sinister import from in partibus infidelium, from pagan lands. But also the concept of zero was very troubling for theism, and must be and does indeed remain so. It's one of the many, many ways in which theism is not compatible with the scientific worldview.
Rabbi Wolpe, may I ask you?
I just want to point out, without even taking issue with the incorrect statements that he made. But I want you to understand. Wait. I want you to understand the progress of the argument that you just heard, because it's important that people do this all the time, and at least you should be aware of it, whether you accept it or not. Very often when people argue with you, especially when they argue about religion, they attribute their own beliefs to logic and your belief to psychology. So religious people believe in something because they need to be loved, or they need a crutch, or they're weak. But I believe what I believe because it's true and scientific. And I just want you to be aware that you cannot actually disprove someone's belief by imputing an unworthy motive to it. You actually have to disprove the belief. So don't let Christopher pull the psychological wool over your eyes. You can actually be just as worthy or unworthy of love, just as tough-minded, just as thoughtful, just as deep, and still believe in God, as most human beings have throughout all of human history, as if you are Christopher Hitchens.
Christopher, are you a trickster?
Well, I don't think that you couldn't accuse that of being an incorrect statement. You would accuse it of being an incomplete one. I didn't give all the reasons why people believe in God. But after all, you did write a whole book that argues that the belief in God can be very useful to people in times of crisis. Did you not? I mean, that's
Yes, but I never said that was why you should believe in God.
No, and I don't think it is the reason why many people do. But remember that there are two questions. I better now say, lest I be accused of not having exhausted the entire subject in my first response. I better say there are at least two questions. One is this: is there a God, a creator, a prime mover, an uncaused cause, whatever you like to call it? And this was the question answered at a certain point, not very long ago in our history, by the deists, people like Thomas Jefferson, Thomas Paine, and many others, who said that the order of the universe seemed to suggest that it couldn't just have been random, that there may have been a designer, but the designer didn't take any part in human affairs. And that in the late 17th, early 18th centuries was probably, late 18th, early 19th centuries was probably a very intelligent position to hold. It was as far pre-Einstein, pre-Darwin, was probably as far as you were likely to get with philosophical speculation. But so believing that there might be a cause or a mover or a creator is one thing, but believing that there is a supervising, intervening entity who cares who wins the war, who cares who you sleep with and in what way, who cares what you eat and on what day, and in other words, who makes you the center of the whole cosmos, is another thing altogether. So people who say, I believe in God, I'm a deist, have all their work in front of them before they can say that they are really religious.
Are you prepared to be a deist?
No.
No divine mover, even at the whatever, the origin?
There's nothing in the natural, in the cosmic order, or that's the macro level, or the micro level, that's to say the constituent of our own DNA and the things that we have in common with the other animals, and indeed other forms of life like plants. that isn't susceptible to a much better explanation.
Well, here's,
As the great physicist Laplace said when he demonstrated his working model, his orrery, as it's called, of the solar system to the emperor, and Napoleon said, well, I see there's no God in this system, and Laplace said, well, Your Majesty, it works without that assumption.
Rabbi, I don't want to play God, but to give form to this.
sure.
It's 2010. You said you think of God as the source of all. In the year BCE, 2010, why attribute the source of all to divinity? What about science? And you just said...
Well, that's exactly what I was just going to address, is first of all, there are two separate ways of thinking about this, both, and I'll offer them both briefly, and you can decide if both or neither is congenial to you. One is that, of course, you can't equate God and proof for God and discussion of God with a demonstration in a laboratory. That's never been the case. The idea is different, to shift it differently, which is this. I would ask you this question instead. Deep down, do you believe that the universe is constituted only by stuff, by material, or is there a mystery at the heart of things? Do you believe that you are purely synapses, or is there something immaterial and eternal about you and those you love? Do you believe that things like love are just an epiphenomena of the way evolution has put us all together, or do you think there is something that in the fact that immaterial things like ideas and love and consciousness have such a profound influence on our lives that lead you to believe that the intangible can be at least as real or more real than the tangible? If that way of looking at the world appeals to you or speaks to you, then you understand that Laplace, in order to explain how the heavens go, may not need the hypothesis of God, but that in order to explain why there is something rather than nothing, why there is a deeper meaning to life than stuff alone, that's something that speaks to you and lets you understand that God is real. That's part one. Wait. Part two is there are, in fact, things that are suggestive of something greater in even the scientific worldview, which is why, by the way, in the American Academy of Science, more than half consistently, and this has been true for the last 100 years, 52% of scientists say that they believe in God. And that is the fact that everything exists rather than nothing, that consciousness, which is still inexplicable to human beings, is real, that I make sounds, and which is immaterial, and it touches you in some way that makes you want to change things. The way of looking at the world, even from what we can see and touch and feel, suggests that there's something greater than what we know. And now, go right ahead.
All right. Jake, initial thoughts?
I mean, so far, I think it's he's definitely not like a, David Wolpe's not a chump or anything. He's saying some interesting things, but I feel like they're not really getting at the heart of it yet. They're still kind of talking about their own pet causes. Hitchens, by talking about why people believe in God, doesn't really have to do that much about like whether God is real. I guess it could speak to I guess if there's a psychological reason people might want to do it, that would makes it more likely that it was fictitious. But I feel like they're still kind of setting the table. Was there anything that jumped out to you? Particularly, I'm curious about, like, David was trying to make some logical moves.
Yeah, I mean, at the early on, it seemed like Wolpe. That's how you say it, Wolpe.
I think so.
Okay, all right, fair enough. Early on, it seemed like Rabbi Wolpe was just sort of either making some pretty not super duper specific statements, right? That like, well, God is the source of everything and is also, what did he say? He was something like a person you could have a relationship with. and it did make me curious, right? Like what what exactly Wolpe believes, right? Because I think I guess I'm not sure about his denominational affiliation or anything, but I mean, like
he's conservative Jewish.
Okay. So yeah, so I think that there's a pretty broad range of like what he might actually think when you get down to brass tacks, right? Given that, right? So that like
yeah, actually, he got in trouble. This might give some background. He got in trouble by denying some of the history of the Bible and of like the Passover story and stuff. And he basically said archaeologically this isn't true. Doesn't really matter if it's true. So that might help foreground. He's not like a biblical literalist. I think he probably believes that a broad spectrum of belief within Judaism is, probably okay by him. He still is conservative, right? Which is more religious than reformed. So he does believe, and he's not the least strict form of Judaism, but he does believe in science, I think. So that's going to be an easier place to argue from than if he was some kind of like biblical literalist. Like he's not going to be able to be trapped in that. Just for some background.
Right. Actually, that's interesting. I think I might have a million years ago. I think I might have actually read a book that by this guy, because as you were saying all that, it's like, oh, I didn't connect the name, and I don't, it's been too long.
Yeah.
But I definitely remember, and this would have been like, I don't know, 1999 maybe, so that's it's not fresh in my memory, but I do remember reading a book by a rabbi who said exactly what you just said about the Exodus story and all of that.
Interesting. Yeah, David's actually my uncle, so no, so I know a lot about him. But yeah, so what do you make of Christopher? Or did you finish your thought on David?
Yeah, well, all I was gonna say about Rabbi Wolpe is that, like, I mean, I think given all that, right, like, I think there's like a kind of theological range there that could extend pretty far, right? Because in my experience, at least, right, it's like if somebody, I mean, if he, I mean, if like, Orthodox Jews can be pretty much counted on to mean by God what they're like asserting the thing that people like Christopher Hitchens are denying, right? That in other words, that there's like this being that's all powerful and all knowing that created the universe. But I think, like, the liberal denominations, right? Reform, conservative, Reconstructionist, right? I mean, there are differences that are important, as you alluded to. I mean, certainly in terms of the sort of degree of like traditionalism and like liturgy and ritual practice and, all that stuff, right? That between those, but like, I think as far as this question goes, is probably pretty similar, that you get this range among those groups that's like goes from people who, at least on the question of what do we mean by God, mean pretty much what like the Orthodox people mean, pretty much what Christopher Hitchens is like thinking of when he says there's no God, up through something a lot harder to pin down, right? And I think that like probably the most liberal like Protestant Christian denominations are probably like this too, right? That like when you really like, put on the, the bright light and start interrogating somebody, right? It's like, okay, exactly what do you mean by this? And it can get a little bit slippery sometimes, right? That like is it's like was it Mordecai Kaplan, right? There's the force in the universe that makes for goodness or something like that. It's like, what does that mean? I don't know what that means, right? But the last that, so it could be that there's some sort of incredibly vague hippie pantheism going on here. Although I will say that the last bunch of comments that he made do make me think that he probably does mean something relatively traditional when he says, right, like when he says the word God, right? Because he even trotted out at the end there the sort of like, why is there something rather than nothing argument, which is a sort of like a kind of intuitive way of expressing the cosmological argument for the existence of God, where you say that, you know, everything has to have a cause, and so they're you know, the universe as a whole, right? Maybe the material universe as a whole must have a cause, and then he again, all the stuff before that is a little bit slippery around the edges. Some of the way he put it, maybe a little unsure, but sure seemed like he was saying, well, okay, if you're an atheist, you've got to be like a reductive materialist. You have to
I think maybe something to look out for me is I'd be curious. Now, I'm sure he has some positive beliefs, right, that go beyond what I believe, but I'm curious how he's going to separate himself from someone like me who put my cards on the table. No, I mean, I'm not, I'm probably functionally an atheist, but my belief is more just that I believe it's impossible to know the answers to these questions, you know, even though I think it's interesting to think about. So if he says, like, is there something, you know, why is there something rather than nothing? I don't think we currently know the answer to that. You know what I mean? So I do think whatever, like, I think anything's possible in that regard. I mean, we could live in a computer simulation, right? But the point is that, like, so then if he's basically saying to me, like, well, how do you feel about those questions? Like, logically, I think it's impossible. And then to know, in my opinion, right? And then if he's basically saying to me, like, well, you know, if you want to jam out on how you feel about those questions, but I'm curious how he's going to try to separate himself from someone like me who's just agnostic, right? To get positively into, like, I believe it. He's basically just saying, like, come on, you feel it, right? Like, you're right. He does. I mean, I think he's slick because, like you said, he did the, like, prime mover argument, right? But then he also is just like, when you think about love, like what we talk about when we talk about love, or like how do you feel, you know?
I believe that's from the 18th century Polish Hasidic Rebbe Raymond Carverstein.
Everything I'm saying is Carverstein and Maimonides, so I'm curious how he's going to try to do that, because it seems pretty easy to me to be like, well, it could be God, and I just choose to believe in that because, you know, whatever, right? But it's hard to make the positive case, if that makes sense.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I do have some thoughts about the is it knowable and what to do with it, and about the prime mover argument. But we've been talking for a while, so let's see how Hitchens responds first.
I can't paraphrase him properly, but you really ought to get hold of. It's easy to find on Google, a lecture given by Lawrence Krauss, who I regard as the greatest living physicist, and it's about the quantum, and it's about a whole universe from nothing. It's exactly how you get from nothing to something. In fact, quite a lot of things. One means by which this happens is the following: every second that we're speaking, a star the size of our sun or bigger goes out, blows up or goes out. That's been the case every single second since the first moment of the Big Bang. It's a lot. That'll be a lot of suns going out as we speak. And there's a lot of annihilation, isn't it? There's a lot of destruction. It's a rather what you might call almost a wasteful scale. It does have the positive outcome, though, that we are all constituted of those materials. We are made of stardust. Now, I find that a rather more majestic and wonderful and even beautiful idea than, say, the idea of the burning bush. A bit more impressive, gives you more to think about.
Are they mutually exclusive? Are they mutually exclusive? Would God make you a stardust?
One has the virtue of being true and provable and studyable, which the other doesn't. And I do think that the verifiability of something is a virtue of
Are we simply material then?
Yes, we don't have bodies, we are bodies. Until 50,000 years ago, there were 4 other kinds of biped, humanoid, not unlike us, still living on the planet, died leaving no descendants. We're the only survivors of those people. That family were the last. We don't know if they had gods or not.
So you think the inexplicable?
No religion ever invented appears to have known that these creatures even existed, because the religious are forced to believe that the only really significant event that happened So in the human story, it happened about 3,000 years ago.
And the mysteries, the inexplicable, are we
No,
just waiting
That's
to
not
understand
true.
them?
No, it's
So
that's
wait,
just
no.
factually
all
not
of this,
true.
all of this massive Big Bang cosmological churning and destruction and annihilation, which is paralleled, by the way, on our own Earth, where 99% of all species that have ever been on the planet have already gone extinct, leaving no descendants. All of this could be part of a plan. There is no way an atheist can prove it's not. But it's some plan, isn't it? With mass destruction, pitiless extermination, annihilation going on all the time, and all of this set in motion on a scale that's absolutely beyond our imagination, in order that the Pope can tell people not to jerk off.
Rabbi, stupid. Right. Now, I think here we've reached
It's childish to
we've
believe.
reached an area of agreement. I too repudiate that statement by the Pope, and I'm happy to do it publicly. No. Wait just a second. Hold on.
Do what publicly?
First of all, it's just not true that religions don't actually acknowledge very important things that happened before their own founding. Just read the beginning of the Bible, which goes back far beyond the founding of the Bible. But more important than that, there are actually things that if you are material, you can't give an accounting of. For example, you might not believe that you have free will. You might think that everything you do was predetermined from the beginning of the Big Bang. And just the fact, by the way, that all of the universe, physics tells us, came from something tinier than the head of a pin is, to me, there is no word other than miraculous for it, but nonetheless. You might believe that everything you did, our words tonight, the fact that those flowers would be orange on the table, that was all predetermined from the beginning of time. But if you believe that you actually make a choice, that human beings have free will, then I ask you how you account for that. You didn't pick your birth, your genetics, you didn't pick your environment. So from the very beginning, all of that was predetermined for you. And unless there is something immaterial about you that allows you to choose, then everything human beings do is already set from the beginning of time. I don't understand how you get free will if you don't have...
Right, just real quick, he's assuming free will. That's a big move, right? To say, okay, if you believe it. Yeah, if you believe it, that's a big move, right?
It is a big move, right? And you could just as easily say, like, you know, given that our best understanding of the world is some kind of materialism, here's a topic: do we have free will, right? And you know, he's assuming that the answer would then be no, and you know, but like, I don't, you know, that doesn't go without saying, right? Like that's, you know, we have, you know, we've had Ryan Lake on for one of these before. We were watching something that was about free will, and you know, Ryan wrote his dissertation about this. He's a compatibilist with, you know, and he would certainly say, yeah, there's no conflict between those things, right? I mean, that you could think that like consciousness is ultimately some sort of you know, process happening in material, you know, like, or whatever, the supported by a material brain, however exactly, you know, you conceptualize that. Don't at me. I'm not trying to make some kind of statement about philosophy of mind there. I actually don't care at all about that. But like, you know, in some way or another is not outside of the realm of physical reality. And nevertheless say, well, you know, you could think that free will is, you know, like what, like people like John Martin Fisher would say, which is that, you know, the kind of free will that matters for moral responsibility, which is the main reason we care about free will, right? You know, to think that people are in control of their actions when we're thinking about whether they're responsible for their actions, that, you know, that the Fisher's view would be that that's, well, what matters is that your actions are generated by a cognitive mechanism that's at least somewhat responsive to reasons, so that, you know, you can understand reasons for and against it, and they move you to some extent, you weigh them, etc. And, you know, whatever, maybe you're not convinced by that. I don't think it looks like you are, but they have a, if, you know, but if not, right, maybe you'll even say, no, I actually don't think, given, you know, given that I'm not like allowing myself anything magical, explanation of how any of this works, right? I just think that our physical brains give rise to thoughts and feelings, and we can reason and all that, but like it's we can't magically cancel out the laws of cause and effect. Then maybe given all that, I don't believe in free will, right? Also a perfectly respectable position. But yeah, you're right. I mean, just sort of working backwards from, well, we definitely have free will, right? Therefore the physical world can't be all there is like a really weird, like on multiple levels, because it's like,
And yeah, no, go ahead.
I mean, the premise might not be true, right? I mean, that's incredibly controversial, right? We have free will. And then it's also not clear that the conclusion would follow, even if it did, because, like, again, there are people who have these views according to which free will and determinism are compatible. That you have that that, like, if you understand free will in a certain way, then, like, we would have it even if everything was material, and obviously that's incredibly controversial. But I mean, like, I think it does go to the point that this is kind of glib, just to go straight from like, well, it feels like we have free will. How does that work? I don't know, probably magic.
Yeah, I think it's psychologically manipulative, because if you haven't thought about the topic that much, then you're like, yeah, of course I have free will. So he has a lot of people on board just because it feels terrifying to think that the world is mechanistic, right? But that's an emotional plea, in my opinion. Or like, if you're talking to a philosopher, this doesn't hold water, or even someone who knows the different arguments. But if it's just kind of like, there's a free will debate you haven't thought of that much, I'm here telling you, what do you feel? You probably feel like you do, right? So let's start there. I think it's a bit slippery. I think it's a bit manipulative.
Yeah, I mean, at the very least, I think it's way too quick. I do want to also go back to earlier, because I don't, my own cards on the table, right? Like, I do think, I am an atheist, a very, very not militant one, right? I think I don't actually think it's like morally or politically important to like get everybody to agree with me. And I like the religious left a whole lot more than I like, secular libertarians or, secular neoconservatives. But I do think, right, if we're gonna take an evening off of that and argue about philosophy, like, if that's what we're doing, then I do think that I do think there probably isn't a God, right? That certainly, if what you mean by God is the all PKG God, right? All powerful, all knowing, all good. The sort of, which is like what Maimonides would say. You mentioned him earlier, is what Thomas Aquinas would say.
Definitely what he would say. That's why I brought him up, because I know everything that he thinks, because I'm a Talmudic scholar. Anyway, keep going.
Yeah, right, obviously. So, but yeah, I mean, this is what, like, the sort of most traditional versions of all of the Western religions would say, right? That that's that God is this all powerful, all knowing, perfectly morally good being who created the world and rules it. Okay, and my view on that would be no, clearly not, because stuff happens all the time that a morally perfect being, or even a morally kind of sort of okay being, would want to prevent, and an all powerful being would definitely be able to. And people have come up with various explanations of why it wouldn't, but none of them, I don't find any of them plausible. And then say, okay, what if we relax the definition a little bit and say, like, well, maybe God isn't all of the, maybe what we mean by God is some sort of entity that's not quite all of those things to a 100% degree, so we can get around that problem, right? But like, is some sort of like supernatural being who somehow brought about everything, but is either not all powerful or not completely good or whatever, right? That, like, or maybe not all of either one, whatever. Then I would say, okay, then it's much harder to show that definitely that being doesn't exist. But then the question about whether that leaves you with atheism or agnosticism, I would say, gets down to whether you think that like considerations of simplicity, right? Occam's razor actually gives you a reason to believe in the non-existence of things, right? That in other words, like, I'm not an agnostic about werewolves, right? I don't think there are any werewolves, but you know there could be, right? I mean, it's just about barely possible that, you know, I mean, I watched Underworld, right? You know, that the werewolves are existing in secret. That's part of the plot of the movie, right? You know, that they
Underworld, like it's like 2003 type movie, or is that
Yeah,
like
yeah.
with Kate Beckinsale?
Yeah, that's the one. That's the one, right? It's
Okay.
the secret war between the werewolves and the vampires, right?
Jay Andy's not here, so I had to do him proud by getting that movie reference. But anyway,
Yeah,
that's
yeah, exactly. And you know, and I think yeah, it's a goofy movie. It's one of those, like, I think after Blade, which is the last one we talked about with Jason Miles and Trey Reid, you know, I think sort of created that like particular kind of like vampire action movie genre. Like that was one of the first things to jump on it. It's a good movie. It's a fun movie. But in any
it
case,
is 2000. It is 2003, by the way. It's pretty
nice,
dope.
nice. Yeah. That's a good memory. Yeah, I mean, look, it's just barely possible that that there are werewolves, and that like it's just that no evidence has ever been deduced, whatever. But like, you know, probably not. And I actually do kind of think that like just saying like, given the evidence we have, the simpler explanation would be not. You know, I mean, again, I think that's the issue, whether it gets down to whether you think that that sort of consideration is enough to is enough to form beliefs about what doesn't exist, right? But certainly on the first cause argument, I'm very unconvinced by that, because I think if you say, well, everything has to have a cause, so the physical world as a whole must have a cause, then the obvious response is, okay, well, whatever caused that, does that have to have a cause? And you know, I think like I think there's actually a pretty deep problem there. Like if you say, because you know, if there's everything has to have a cause, there can't be a first cause. A first cause is an uncaused cause, and granted, right, because the first cause, right, like if everything has a cause, the first cause would have a cause, but then it wouldn't be the first cause, right? It would have a cause. And granted, like any like schmancy philosopher who's like done the first cause argument isn't going to say everything has a cause. They're going to like say something narrower, because I think that problem is like sort of obvious in advance. But I'm not convinced that any of the narrower things quite work. So you know, it's
Yeah, this is all good. I think that it's just funny to me how like dorm room bong hit my thoughts about this have been compared to yours, where you've actually spent like professional time thinking about this. I mean, everyone thinks about these things, but you know, I'm still working on mine. Maybe I'll drop some
no, this is just
my real. Yeah, well, hopefully there's some dorm room bong hit aficionados like in the comments and in the viewers who I could be like an audience proxy for them, you know. But should we keep should we keep going?
I like the dorm room bong hit stuff, but I was just gonna say the one other thing I wanted to say is that it's like, okay, so I find all the first cause stuff super unconvincing.
Yeah.
But Hitchens' response to it just now was awful, right? Like his response, something come from nothing. Well, Lawrence Krauss says, you know, quantum physics is about something coming from nothing.
Yeah, because isn't that doesn't answer the question philosophically, right? It just answers it like in terms of the physics we know, but it doesn't. Does it answer the question philosophically? I don't think so. I don't know. That's what I thought that was really
I think the Krauss stuff is terrible, right? I think that I think that it is just like a giant non sequitur, because like if I think if you actually read Krauss, what he says is, well, you know, sort of physical stuff, you know, matter as we usually think of it, comes from these sort of basic physical fields. and anybody, I'm trying to remember who I'm plagiarizing. I think this is David Albert who said this. He's like, yeah, but that's like saying that, like, your fist comes from your fingers, right? That's like, okay, but where do the fingers come from, right? Like that, like just saying like, oh, there are these like more basic physical fields that are sort of prior to like what we usually think of as matter. It's like, okay, that's nice. So where do the fields come from, right? Like that doesn't actually. It's like it's a really goofy answer, and it's exactly the kind of goofy answer that I think what Rabbi Wolpe said earlier actually kind of anticipates by saying like, okay, but like, can what you demonstrate in a physics lab, or like is that really the same question, right? Like, and it really doesn't seem like it is the same question. That like, because anything, I mean, I think anything you come up with in the laboratory is ultimately going to be about how some physical things, right, the kinds of entities that you can study in a laboratory come from other physical things, and that's all interesting. But I mean, like, that's not gonna, I mean, if you think this is a really big problem, right, how can like something can't come from nothing, what causes everything, whatever. Again, I don't actually think it is. I think that, like, because you can just push it back, and you haven't actually advanced anything by bringing in God, but like that would be my take. But like, if you do think that's a big problem, then none of the Krauss stuff is going to be relevant. It's just not going to, like, that's just not even going to be an interesting answer.
Yeah. No, I mean, my take though is that when you're saying you're pushing it back and you're pushing it back, then that seems to point to the fact that there's like some shit about time and the way that the world or the universe works that we absolutely have no idea, right? Like, we don't know how the universe started for real. We know there's a Big Bang. We don't know how the Big Bang came to be, right? So when I talk about being agnostic, I just more find those questions so unfathomable that my take would be more like, I feel like there might be something really deep that we don't know. That said, maybe theoretical physicists feel closer to that answer, but something like what he's talking about doesn't seem anywhere closer to that answer at all. You know what I mean? Because that seems to be more of a philosophical question of, like, anyway, just to your point. But
also I agree with Silver. I don't know what AA stands for there, but like, but certainly atheism per se doesn't require even philosophical materialism. I mean, this is the I feel embarrassed to quote this given the source, but back when I used to sometimes watch Bill Maher, and not just like a bunch at a time to write an article about him, but like recreationally, in the distant past, I remember him having a good line about how it's like, saying atheism is religion is like saying that abstinence is a sex position. That's like, it's not, no, you don't. Atheism doesn't require you to believe anything, right? Atheism just requires, except for like one really specific negative belief, right? That's it, right? Like, they have, you could absolutely say, I don't believe in God, but I absolutely believe in, healing crystals and, whatever. Like, you shouldn't, right? Like, that would be dumb.
That's me.
Okay.
That's me.
Okay. But it would be internally consistent is the point.
Yeah.
Let's keep going.
God, Christopher.
It's pathetic. I'm sorry to say, it's to say of the cosmological and the genetic that these are deterministic processes. They're not at all. They're full of extraordinary randomness, and in the genetic case of mutation, Stephen Jay Gould, the great paleontologist, wrote a book which I recommend to you called The Burgess Shale, which is it's the side of a mountain in Canada, in Canadian Rockies, that's sheared off. So you can see the inside of a mountain. You can see it as if you're looking at a blackboard, and you can see the growth and development of species, and you realize that it's not a tree, it's more like a bush. The reverse branches that go off and don't go nowhere, and the others that succeed. And there are different kinds of failure and different kinds of mutation. His most exciting thought, most revolutionary thought, is this. If you could, so to speak, put all that onto a tape and rewind it, and then press play again, there's no certainty it would come out the same way. In fact, there's every reason to believe that it would not. So there's nothing predetermined, there's nothing deterministic about this at all.
So
thanks
free
to our
will
understanding
exists.
of our genetics, which are also not predetermined because they're a result of random mutation and natural selection, as everyone now knows. And that's why we can have, sad to say for the kosher, but we can have skin transplants and organ transplants from pigs who are much closer to us than we used to think. We can also sequence the DNA of viruses and learn how to immunize ourselves from it. It works, in other words. But yes, it can be tampered with.
People are still getting COVID.
For good as well as for ill. There's nothing deterministic about it at all. It's much more exciting. It's much more interesting. It's much more rewarding. It's verifiable. And yes, there are elements of, I was trying to say, the miraculous, the awe-inspiring, the tragic, the majestic in this, that there simply are not in the incantations of Genesis, where the supposed authors claim to know the divinity, the creator, on personal terms. This is nonsense. It's for children.
Rabbi?
First of all, it is interesting. I mean, Stephen Gould, who was, by the way, very sympathetic to religion and wrote a book called Rocks of Ages, which I also recommend to you, where he said that religion and science don't overlap.
They sure do.
But wait 1 second. If you read his book on the Burgess sale, he does say if you rewind, then you assume if you push play again, you would get a different result. And that's certainly true unless the result was intended. But more important than that, yes, there's randomness in the system. Nobody would argue that there isn't randomness in the system. But randomness isn't free will. Randomness is getting a result you don't expect. The question is, how do you get a directed choice, which isn't random? I choose right now to pick this glass up. Now, how did I make that choice? If I'm purely a product of my DNA and my environment, then it's not a choice. Then it was programmed in, then it's instinct. And the whole point that religion's always made about instinct was that human beings can rise above it. Unlike animals, which are the same at age 2 as they are at age 10, as they are at age 15, a human being grows and changes and chooses. That's the basis of religious.
Yeah, Rabbi Wolpe,
I have to say, to me, it doesn't seem a matter of religion.
Different issues here.
Yeah, this isn't good. I mean, I feel like, so then that means that your instinct, the only thing that is free will are your instincts. So like when, if you're like hungry and you don't eat, that means you have that means you have free will, which is like basically like sub-college understanding of what the free will argument is, right? Free will is like, oh man, like my parents wanted me to, go to Duke, but instead I went to State to hang out with my friends. So that means I have free will because I have the freedom to choose. Or I don't live in a totalitarian state, so I have free will, right? Yeah. Like I live in America. It's just that's a childish argument, I think.
Yeah, I mean he's putting together a bunch of different things, right? So there's because first, like, he's making a reasonable point, which is like, okay, there's a difference between randomness and free decision, right? That like just because something's undetermined, right, doesn't mean that it's that's free, right? I mean, if there's like just sort of some weird quantum equivalent of a coin flip going on in your brain that generates actions, right, that doesn't feel any more like what we're looking for when we talk about free will than saying there's a deterministic process in your brain that did that, right? That distinction doesn't even seem relevant, right, to that. So that was a correct point. That was fine, right? But then everything after that was kind of a weird mess, right? Because it's like, oh, well, but what about when I reach for this water and they have like, okay, it's a directed choice. It's like, okay, but you're just now what you're talking about is whether something's a conscious decision or not, right? That like you had the thought, I'm going to do it, and you did it as a result of that thought, which fine. Nobody denies that, right? I mean, that's not like people who say, I don't believe in free will. They're not saying, I don't believe that people do things because they decided to do them, right? That would be a really uninterestingly wrong view. Because if it was really that easy, it's like, oh, check it out. I decided to hold this up. But that's not what people are arguing about, right? What they're arguing about is whether those decisions, like, I don't know, maybe whether they really come from us in a certain way, or whether whether they're the kind of thing that like it makes sense to hold people responsible for, or maybe whether they're the kind of thing that that are that like it's the kind of decision that like it comes about in the right way, that it would like be meaningful, and that whatever, like there might be a bunch of different things that people mean by free will, but like I don't think anything anybody has ever meant when they say I don't believe in free will is I don't believe that we do things because we decided to do them, or I believe that we are exactly the same mentally at the age of 2 as we are later, or I believe that every single thing that human beings does comes from like instinct as opposed to socialization or other things. It's like no, none of that has anything to do with like what people are talking about when they're arguing about free will.
Yeah, maybe we could watch more, but then I'm sure somebody has thought that way, and that person is probably like a high school student who got a prompt and misunderstood it, and they're discussing it. I mean, that's kind of where they're at right now. They're kind of misunderstanding the discussion question, or at least David is. Although I found Hitchens' discussion of like randomness of genetic sequence to be pretty far afield as well.
I think the whole exchange was awful.
Yeah, but they're having fun though, and you know what? I kind of like Christopher Hitchens' outfit. So for those outfit haters,
there are a lot of outfit haters in the chat.
You know what? It's the way he's wearing it. It's not the outfit itself.
No, exactly. I mean, the fact that he hasn't unbuttoned it like while he's sitting there like that is a bad.
It's the button is fighting for dear life. I will say, and that David, he has a good tailor, I'm sure.
Well, I was just gonna say, I mean, I think in general, I think all the stuff about randomness and free will and everything from both of them was just awful. I think that the like maybe it'll get better as we go on, but like, I mean, whatever. Like, and I think there are things he's right about, there are things he's wrong about. I think there are things that like he's good at, there are things he's not good at when they come up in these debates. But I think there is a certain overall sense in which Christopher Hitchens is like amazing at this. Like when you're watching him at his best, right? That like, and we actually have seen some of these debates on here, right? Like that, like he just rhetorically and, you know, and some of the interesting moves to make and whatever, like he, at his very best, he can, you know, like I think he's as good at this as just about anybody who has been in the YouTube era. But this is not the best.
That I can choose to pick up this class. That seems to me to be well within what could develop purely scientific basis.
How?
I'm not a scientist, but it doesn't seem like a mystery of God to me personally.
Oh, sure it is. Well, no, but seriously, where does the element of free choice come from?
I could be purely instinctual and put my head in a stream and drink and choose to do that.
Wait, when you say choose, when you say choose, where does the choice come from any more than the choice of this glass to fall down? Where do you get a choice as opposed to a complex interaction of DNA and environment, neither of which you chose?
Again, piling on completely unnecessary assumptions. It's also inviting a question that will make you uncomfortable.
Go ahead.
If you say that no, it's because God has given you free will, I have to ask you, how do you know that?
Well, are you assuming that we have free will? Are you assuming that we have free will? Then give me another source.
If you answer my question with another question,
give me another
I'll still
source.
answer it.
Okay.
I will still answer it, even though your question is an answer to mine. Rather, not an answer, a response to mine.
Yeah.
The view I take about free will is that, of course, we have free will because we have no choice but to have it. I was, and to some extent, and I still, to some extent, am a dialectical materialist, and I also think there are some ironies in the universe as well as in history. But to say, of course we have free will, the boss says we've got it, is to make a mockery of the whole concept. And it's also to invite the question, what kind of tyranny is this that you want? You want an all-supervising, all-deciding person. I ask you first, what sources of information do you have about this person's existence that I don't have, that are denied to me? I'd like to know. And second, why do you want it? Why do you want to arrive at a terminus of unfreedom where there is a celestial authority upon whom all things depend and from which all things flow? Why do you want that, and how on earth do you know that there's any case to be made for its existence?
Yes, please. That's a good question.
I don't think that's a terminus of unfreedom.
I think you're only free when you've declared against it, frankly. That's the beginning of freedom, is the emancipation from the tyranny of theocracy, yes.
I actually think that the whole point that I was making was that a belief in a God who creates you is what gives you free will. And that without it, you have to fall into a determinism. And by the way, you may think that science gives it to you, but every scientist I've asked on this question, including David Barash, who's an evolutionary biologist, says that and Steven Pinker had the same reaction. is that it is more or less a commonplace of modern science, that determinism is the only worldview that's consistent with an understanding of the way science works. So you may be able to find it in science, but I haven't met a scientist yet who's been able to account for it.
Not every
Now,
scientist is a believer.
Putting that aside, no, of course not. I'm saying that those who don't use determinism as their philosophical assumption, but let me answer his question too, which is, therefore, I assume that as a religious person, you're granted freedom. That's the whole point, is you do make choices.
Once you've said granted.
Better choices.
Once you've said granted, you've made my point.
And his English, he knows about
kings. You're granted,
Thank you for making me free.
You're granted freedom. So you're granted freedom by the evolutionary process. I'm granted freedom by a creator. Either way, you have to be.
I'm not granted all sorts of freedom. I mean, of course, scientists are right to this extent. Einstein says the miraculous thing about the laws of nature is they're never suspended. That's what's so amazing about them. They're immutable. Religion claims that on occasions the laws of nature are suspended in order to prove what they wouldn't otherwise.
It depends who you ask, not Maimonides. It depends who you ask in religion.
Is there a fundamental contradiction in your mind, Rabbi, between Jewish teaching and evolution?
No.
None at all?
No. None.
But evolution, as we learn it, doesn't require a deity.
No, well, it depends what you mean by require a deity. It's just like saying that building the stage doesn't require a deity. The question isn't whether the discovery of the mechanism by which God made the world requires God. It just requires the discovery of the mechanism by which God made the world. But it also doesn't outlaw God or make God impossible or make it, in fact, less plausible.
What's the difference, to your mind, between mystery and incomprehension?
Incomprehension.
In other words,
incomprehension describes my reaction to the question.
Oh, great. America's rabbi thinks my question's incomprehensible.
I'm not sure I understand. Tell me again.
Well, science has progressively made a lot of things comprehensible.
Yes. Mystery means those things that by the very nature of the world are unfigure-outable, no matter how bright we are, no matter how hard we work at it.
How do you know that they're unfigure-outable?
Well, you're asking...
Prefer that over incomprehensible.
You're asking no in a way that I'm not willing to concede is the proper way to describe religious conviction. It's like saying to me, how do you know that love exists? Or how do you know that another human being is beautiful? Or how do you know that I don't know, that these lights are a pageant of gorgeous colors? The answer is you don't know it. Some things you have as the deepest conviction of your soul, and they're things that make sense of the world in ways that nothing else makes sense of the world. But if you ask me, do I know that God exists the way I know that that glass is on the table? Then I say you're putting it in an empirical, scientific framework, which is exactly the framework that religious people want to keep religion out of.
No, but I want to put it the other way around. How do you know the mystery won't be solved one day?
Because it's not a mystery of a question that's solvable. It's like saying, how do you know that the mystery won't be solved? That you have an ineradicable sense that the world is wondrous. I don't know how you would even think about solving such a mystery.
I could understand it and still find it wondrous. Christopher, what about you? If it's not God, is it all soluble?
Well, first,
one day,
you're right that science has made many things more comprehensible to us, and it's explained things that religion used to take credit for. In other words, now we know there's a germ theory of disease. Diseases are not curses or revenges from heaven. Same with earthquakes and so on. The stuff they used to teach us, and many of them still do, is nonsense. Evil nonsense as well as ignorant nonsense. But it's also taught us, just in my lifetime, an enormous amount more about how little we know. We're much, much more ignorant than people who lived before Galileo. Because we have now an increasingly large idea of the fantastic expanse of the unknown. That's precisely the moment at which to say that skepticism is what's necessary. Inquiry, debate, doubt. Where's faith in this? Where's the usefulness of faith there? There's no use to it at all. Socrates, who, as far as I know, existed but may well not have done, it doesn't matter to me. No one will insult me if they say, Socrates, your great hero, didn't exist. Try it on a Muslim, try it on a Christian. that their prophets didn't exist, or tell people that Moses is a myth, they start hurling themselves about, making menacing noises very often. Socrates said, you're only educated when you've understood how ignorant you are. And you're only going to even find that out by doubting everything all the time. There's all the difference in the world between that outlook and that mentality, and the mentality of faith. And second, on metaphysics, which I noticed take refuge in several times already this evening, like what is love? Is something poetic or is it prosaic? Very good questions, but metaphysical ones. Those who say God exists and intervenes in the world, in other words, those who say there is a religious God, the God of religion, are saying that redemption is on offer to human beings, that salvation is on offer to them, and that if they reject the offer, they can be in really big trouble. Now, don't start talking to an audience like this, or if you don't mind, to a debate partner like me, as if religion was a private matter, because everybody knows that if it was, there wouldn't be anything to argue about. It's precisely because it claims to be a total solution, a complete solution to all problems, available on pain of death, sometimes, in some forms, but available to you if you'll only have enough faith. Well, we've just found out that faith is probably the most overrated of the virtues and the one least useful to us in the real dilemmas that we actually have to face.
There are so many things to unpack in that statement that I'll just pick on two or three. The first being, interestingly, that Socrates, whether he existed or not, according to Plato at least, believed in the gods and even in an afterlife. So he didn't doubt everything.
The gods may be.
But wait, didn't interrupt you. But I want you to know, and you should know this in particular. I didn't interrupt you twice. But I want you to know.
You weren't quick enough.
It may be true that part of it was speed, but I also think it's because civility is very religious virtue. So
I could have said that.
The Jewish tradition actually doesn't tell you that everyone must do this in the world. Rather, it prescribes goodness. And that's what it is that religion is supposed to bring into the world. Now, can you point to examples of religious wickedness? Of course you can. But that's clearly what Judaism asks of people. The first obligation that you have is goodness. And that's why when you talk about religion as though it is inherently totalitarian and tells you must act this way, it makes two mistakes. First of all, it doesn't see religion as evolving as everything else does, when in fact the Judaism of thousands of years ago ought to be, must be, should be, is expected to be different from the Judaism of today.
Still has 10 commandments.
Yes, none of it mentioned goodness.
Guys, you have to let me finish my statement, okay?
Please.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I feel a little bit between a sandwich here. But the second part of it is that if you say that faith does nothing for you, as Christopher repeats over and over again, it's very hard to explain why it is that millions and millions of people all over the world and throughout history have felt that faith deepens their life, gives them meaning, increases their goodness, and why it is, for example, in America, that people of faith give more to.
Real quick, I know we have a lot to get to, but I think when they're discussing the role of religion in society and the role and the use of faith to someone individually, it's a lot more interesting, and they have a lot more to say than the metaphysical part of it, which they're kind of mangling. But you know what I'm saying? Because that's more of just, it's not an empirical argument, but I think those perspectives, they seem to have a lot more valuable things to say, at least.
Yeah, no, I think that's I obviously know Hitchens better than I know Rabbi Wolpe, but that's generally true of Hitchens, that when he's where he really shines is when he's given this kind of humanistic moral critique of he would say religion. I think if we're really being honest about it, like maybe the Abrahamic religions and maybe especially Christianity, because that's what he's really thinking of. But yeah, I mean, I think that's what he's much better at, right? Like, or like that Catholic Church debate. that we watched with Mark and Ryan, that he's debating. He and Stephen Fry, which is actually kind of funny to think about now, because I was going through when I was back in Michigan this summer. I was watching. Me and Jen and my mom were watching the old Jeeves and Wooster show that has Stephen Fry in it. But Hitchens and Stephen Fry debating a Catholic archbishop and a Tory MP about whether the Catholic Church is a force for good in the world. And that's like exactly the kind of topic that's good for Hitchens, because he can bring in all of his historical knowledge and all of his like moral eloquence to that. But yeah, I mean, I think that he completely mangled his response to the something rather than nothing problem. And yeah, I think they were both really bad about free will. And it's also interesting because both of them in different contexts did the appeal to what the scientists think where it's not really relevant, which Rabbi Wolpe correctly called out when Hitchens did it. He was like, look, this is all nice, but like, what does this really have to do with the question, right? Like what's the fact that there's some like physical model that you don't need God for that, right? I mean, that doesn't really tell us anything. And I mean, I guess he didn't really even respond to the Lawrence Krauss stuff the way that he should have. But if he had, it would have been along the same lines. But then Rabbi Wolpe turns around and does the same thing on free will, right? He's like, look, it seems to me that we can only have free will if it's we can only have free will if some sort of non-physical magic is involved, right? Which, whatever, is an intuition that some people have, that like, it's only really free will if it's something other than determinism or randomness. It's some really hard to pin down magical third thing. It's not the only way to think about the free will. Again, the sort of compatibilism I'd be sympathetic to would say that what free will is ambiguous, right? There are different kinds of control that people can have over their actions. Different ones might matter for different contexts, like depending on why we're asking the question. If the question that we're asking is about moral responsibility, the idea that what you do is your fault or to your credit, then again, people like John Martin Fisher, Ryan Lake would argue that the kind of control that matters for moral responsibility is like your ability to reason, right? That you can weigh reasons for and against actions, that you understand and can be moved by, right? You're responsive to reasons, or at least that even if you don't apply that well in every case, your decisions come out of this cognitive mechanism that's at least moderately responsive to reasons, which, obviously is very controversial. Lots of people disagree, right? But like, that is one way of understanding it without just saying like there's some sort of mysterious magical thing that couldn't exist if everything's physical. That clearly must exist because it feels like I have free will. But when he was making that argument, like one of the last things he said was, yeah, how can you possibly explain free will if all there is the physical universe, if there's no God? And when I've presented this to blah, 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 famous scientists, Steven Pinker, whoever else he said, they say, well, it's a commonplace among scientists, there's no free will. And to which I would say, why would you ask a scientist about that? I wouldn't ask them that any more than I would ask them like how to respond to the first cause argument for God. In both cases, I don't think they're going to have anything good to say because it's outside of their area of expertise, right? They don't like asking a scientist about that is like asking any other like person who's like a smart person but like hasn't spent that much time thinking about it what they think, right? I would ask people who spend a lot of time thinking about it, and and granted, those people aren't going to all give you the same answer. They're going to disagree like crazy because that's kind of the nature of philosophical issues. They're like big and fuzzy, and there's tons of room to disagree. But like, I think that's true too. The two scientists who signed are both Epstein associates. But
listen, I talked to my good friend Jeffrey Epstein, and I asked him to produce some scientists for me. And
these are the ones he gave all of this really weirdly nihilistic view of the world. I don't know what's up with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, it's like, look, I mean, it's not a slam on scientists. That's just not what they, like if you have a question about physics, a physicist is a good person to go to, right? If you have a question about biology, a biologist is a good person to go to. But like, I'm not saying there aren't even points that you could make to connect stuff you could learn in neuroscience or whatever to like these arguments about free will, but the same way there might be ways you could connect things you can learn in physics to these arguments about whether there's a first cause to everything. But like the point is just like the physicist or the neuroscientist is not somebody who spends all their time thinking about, well, what do we mean by free will exactly? What would count as free will? What are the arguments for thinking that we have it or not? No, they're thinking about neuroscience. So it's like, they're just like, so you're, like, that's just like, hey, I mean, that's just at that point, it's just going to be a vibes based answer, right? They're not going to have read any of this stuff. They're not going to have thought about it, right? They're just kind of like, I don't know, feels to me like no.
Yeah, I think the only thing it disputes is the idea that like, if you spend X amount of time thinking about science, you're going to realize there's no God. But then if you want to, it's interesting, like, if you poll scientists, that's just interesting on some level of like, how does like, I mean, first of all, it depends on the type of science, right? Like you said, like if you're a biologist or something like that, I think polling theoretical physicists would be interesting, right? Just to see like how faith, like intersects with their ideas, but it doesn't necessarily make it wrong or right. I do think it would dispute the notion. Hitchens kind of has this notion of like, oh, if you go deep enough into science, you start realizing X and Y and Z. So I thought when he mentioned in the beginning, oh, well, half of scientists are religious, half aren't, I thought that was relevant, but then it kind of, because that's kind of just, not just, to me, if you're saying, oh, no, look, it doesn't decide one way or the other, then I'm on
actually
board.
A totally reasonable point. Yeah, I agree with that, right? Because it clearly doesn't, right? I mean, so, like, again, just because you're a scientist doesn't mean that you've spent a lot of time thinking about, arguments for the existence of God or what it means to prove something in the first place or any of those things, which are all, interesting further questions, right? That are outside of what you do. So it's like, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't actually think that it's even like, I mean, whatever the percentage are, like, sure. Like, I don't even think the fact that like scientists are more likely to be atheists than non-scientists is any sort of point for atheism. I think that probably I think that's just sort of sociologically, like that reflects the fact that like they're sort of in a cohort of the population that's more likely to not be religious, that's, I mean, like, I don't actually know that the numbers are that different for English literature professors, but, in any case, let's, we should get back to it.
Charity, vote more in elections, volunteer more, help more. Do you know what the largest aid organization is, aid and development organization in the United States? It's not CARE. It's not Save the Children. It's a One World, which is a Christian organization out of Seattle, which not only gives millions and millions and millions of dollars across the world, but sends people all across the world to the most beleaguered, helpless places. And they do it because they believe they're called to do it by God. It's just not true that having faith makes no difference in this world. It makes a tremendous difference, and the vast majority of that difference, not all of it, but the vast majority of that difference is for goodness.
Let me put a question then, if you'd be so good. The rabbi feels in a sandwich, and I don't mean for you to feel in a sandwich. So let me put this to you.
Oh, that's okay.
Christopher, what about the solace of faith? Some of the most religious people I know ended up there.
Oh, this is a softball. I want a hard question.
No, I mean,
I know what he's going to say to this.
Well, maybe, but he's been
hard-minded, hard-hearted, non-needer of solace.
Worse, you're a misanthrope because you're not sympathetic to people's need for religion.
I say in my book, available at fine bookstores everywhere, that as long as I don't have to hear about it, I don't mind what people believe. If they say, well, thanks to Joseph Smith and his gold plates, I have real faith now, and I've got a family, and I have friends, and I have a real system, and so on. I say, fine. Just don't come to my front door with it. Don't ask for a tax break for it. Don't ask my children to be taught it in the school.
Did you sign up tonight thinking you wouldn't hear about it?
And I asked the question in the book. People think they have a personal relationship with the Creator, and they're the possessors of a wonderful secret. It must feel, I've never felt it, but I presume it feels great. Why doesn't it make them happy? They're not happy. They can't be happy until everyone else believes it too. They go out and proselytize very often. No. And here's, I can't let your last answer go. Very often in the guise of charity. You notice how often that religion, rather than answer the questions that I've put, like, how do you know there's a God? What evidence do you have for it? Which you say, well, lots of good people do good things because they're religious. Well, let's take the most recent pressing case. Richard Dawkins and I and a few others, in the response to the Haiti earthquake, set up an emergency charity for people of non-belief to give to, because so many charitable organizations are, in fact, proselytizing groups. So we raised about 2 million in a weekend. And all that money goes straight. By the way, thank you. If you go to Richard's website, you can find out more about how to donate to this, because it's permanent. It's going to stay in being. All that money went straight to Doctors Without Borders, of course, and the International Red Cross, which, though it has a cross, isn't a religious organization. Both these organizations are already in Haiti. They're proven. None of the money goes to support any missionary activity. None. And the Scientologists and all the others who turned up in Haiti, and the people who turned up in Haiti to kidnap babies to convert them to their faith, and the Catholics who turned up and said, standing in the ruins of their own cathedral, with 250,000 Haitians buried under the rubble, said, God spoke here today, and you should listen to his message. Don't tell me that's good. Don't tell me that's good. That's wicked. It's proselytizing. It's proselytizing with the helpless, using them as objects of charity and conversion. It's lying to people.
But there's also a lot of
wrong to lie. It's wrong to lie to people. And it's giving them false hopes and false explanations for their plight. Now, we're not guilty of any of that. And now I'll ask you another question. Where in the Decalogue does the word goodness appear? Where? That's a good swathe of Exodus for you. Where in Exodus does the word goodness appear? Where in this commandment-rich territory does the word goodness or the enjoinment to be good occur? This should be a softball for you.
Okay. First of all, it tells you what you ought not to do. It says, love your neighbor as yourself in the book of Leviticus. I mean, I'm allowed to move to Leviticus from Exodus.
Yes, I think that's fair.
Right.
Yes, that's fair.
Yes, okay. Thank you. I appreciate that. It says you should pursue justice you shall pursue. It says it over and over and over again. And also, by the way, no tradition, at least certainly not the Jewish tradition, and I'm not aware of any other tradition, is only the Bible. Judaism is a long exegetical tradition, and it says several times in the Talmud that the one purpose of the mitzvot is litzaref et habriot, which means to refine human character. It's clear that Judaism is directed around goodness. It's repeated over and over again. The whole system and framework of mitzvot are to get people to treat each other decently. And if you say, which you do, that people use authority, governmental authority, religious authority, military authority, political authority to do bad things, my answer is, of course they do. Anytime you set up a structure of authority, people will do bad things. Churches, other things.
But that isn't what I said.
Yes, of course. So what you say is, what you heard is, when religion does good things, it doesn't count because sometimes they want people to believe what they believe. When it does bad things, it's because of religion. When you make everything good that happens that religion does invalid, and everything bad that religion does representative, that's called arguing in bad faith, which is ironic for someone who has none.
It seems a fair question.
Yes, but it's not, I mean, as I know you know, that isn't at all what I say. I don't say bad things are done in the name of religion or by authorities. I say it's religion itself that is the problem. I go out of my way to make clear that I don't take refuge in any other position. Now, in Leviticus and in Exodus, if you're a neighbor, you better not, and you're supposed to love him. This person had better not be an Amalekite, a Midianite, a Moabite. Better not be a witch.
Yep.
The destruction of whom is enjoined. Better not be a homosexual, the stoning of whom is enjoined. Better not be a slave, the terms of enslavement of which are all laid out. Now, these are primitive, tribal, agricultural. Most of the commandments, by the way, all the Decalogue, by the way, is addressed to the property-owning classes. Here's what you can't do with your servants. Here, your servants must also obey this commandment. Why are the commandments addressed only to people who have staff? Why are the women, rather a large objection, I would have thought, why are the women counted as part of the animal and chattel that's disposable by these holders of property? Couldn't it be any more obvious that this is a man-made phenomenon, and at a time when people were not at their best and were full of fear and ignorance and greed and covetousness of other people's property?
Can we be faithful and not be trapped by history? Not all of its elements are
Well, it's not only that, but as Christopher knows very well, I assume that the Bible was put together by human beings, and that the Jewish tradition is a long evolving tradition, as are other traditions. in which the dross of history is gradually refined in the same way that you would not expect someone 3,000 years ago to be able to understand the sort of arguments that you're making tonight. People change. There's an evolutionary process also, not only to biology, but to sociology, to ideology, all of those things. And that's why the question is very much, does religion make people better? And can these systems refine themselves? And can they get rid of the stuff that's bad in religion? And I think that to assume that you can cherry pick the things in the statements in religion that are negative, and those things are necessarily enduring, contradicts the history of every tradition I know.
Well, cherry picking is an odd word to use for something that's thrust upon you. I've got no choice but to study the Decalogue.
No, actually,
I point out it says it's addressed to property owners and enjoining them to keep women as property owners.
So are you?
Oh, you're cherry picking.
Are you
nitpicking.
Are you in favor of theft, murder, and adultery? Do you think those are good things?
Well, here's exactly the nub of my question. If what you say is true,
yes.
Not that, and I've never said, I couldn't be interpreted as having said no religious person can do a good thing. But if what you say is true, this should be true, and you should find it easy to point it out.
Okay.
There must be something, not that they can do or do, but that I cannot do. That's a good thing. Either a moral statement made or a moral or ethical statement performed that a person of faith could perform that I cannot. You must be able to identify that.
No, actually,
if your point is to have any.
How can one human being do something that another human being can't do physically? Physically, of course, you could do anything that I could do, but I can say lots of things you don't do. I can say lots of things you don't do, not that you can't do. You probably don't do, as I do, bless your child on a Friday night. You probably don't create great works of art based on religion. You probably don't go halfway across the world feeling that you're motivated and called by a God who tells you to help other human beings. I mean, all those things are things that religion motivates people to do. Not that you can't do them, but that people generally don't do them if they're not motivated by religion.
No, get real. I mean, pronouncing an incantation isn't a moral action.
Of course it is.
Or is it? No, it isn't.
It's only not a moral action if you don't feel
subjectively
the enormous.
It's not a moral action. Anyway, it is something. It is something I could do.
It's not. I know, of course you can, and I encourage you to do it.
Yeah.
It's only not a moral action
one day.
if you don't feel the unique expression of love when it takes place in an atmosphere of sanctity that is not the same as saying to a child, I love you. I have to tell you, I mean, some of you knew my father, who passed away in May, who was a rabbi. When I think of the most powerful and intimate moments that I had with my father, it was when he put his hands on my head and blessed me on a Friday night. Now, he would not have done that were he not religious, and it wasn't the same as when he kissed me goodnight and said, I love you. Because there is an element in which religious people dwell. It's called a world of sanctity that you can't invoke and can't dwell in if you don't believe that that realm exists.
So well, wait. First, I'm sorry for your loss, as the Irish say. Sorry for your trouble.
Right.
Second, but I'm still going to have to insist. I don't think anyone in the audience can consider that's an answer to my challenge.
Of course,
that's to say there's a moral or ethical statement or action that an unbeliever could not perform.
But could not means that you're physically incapable of it. And
No.
I'm willing to concede
No, if
right
it's
here,
goodness, it would
you
be
can
morally
do everything I can do.
Well, let's
Of
not go
course
that
you
far.
can.
Let's go.
Of course you can.
All right. Well, then. Okay.
I mean,
all right.
You have to say wouldn't do. You
Well,
can't say
I will leave,
can't
since
do.
you won't answer it, I'll just leave the question to the audience. If anyone
I
can
just
come up
leave
to me and say, here's a moral thing you couldn't do, not don't do, but could not do, that only a religious person do, I'd be very interested to hear of it. No one's ever come up with anything.
Let me ask a
Second,
question.
there was a brief corollary. Think of a wicked thing done or evil thing said.
I just want to really quickly say, I think this round goes to Rabbi Wolpe. Not that, like, I think he was like a little bit sloppy, but I think Hitchens is way worse because Hitchens just like sort of has his line and he's trotting it out. And I don't think anything he's saying is really engaging very much with Rabbi Wolpe's response. But I find this line incredibly frustrating. So if you read my book entitled Christopher Hitchens, What He Got Right, How It Went Wrong, and Why It Still Matters, available from fine booksellers everywhere. Can get that from Red Emma's, which is a particularly fine bookseller because it's a worker-owned bookstore in Baltimore. redemmas.org. But yeah, I mean it's I find this incredibly frustrating because it's like really unclear what he means. And I think there are various ways of interpreted, and I don't think it's a very clear way of getting at what I think he's trying to get at when he asked this, right? What's the moral statement or action that a non-believer, a religious person could do, a non-believer, couldn't or wouldn't. And it's like, I think at least part of Wolpe's response is good, because it's like, yeah, what do you mean couldn't, right? I mean, like because clearly there's some sense in which that's a super uninteresting question, right? I mean, if yeah, you could do anything, right? You could say, I believe in God, whatever. Like, there are lots of things you wouldn't do. Presumably if you're a atheist materialist, you're not going to perform an exorcism. And if there really are demons and exorcisms really do cast them out of people, then that sounds like a moral action to me, right? It sounds like it would be morally good to do it and morally bad not to do it, which gets in another problem, right? Because it's like part of what's in dispute in a lot of this is what, like, in other words, is the question, because if the question is there something that people with a certain religious worldview would see as a moral action that an atheist wouldn't do? I mean, obviously you could do anything, but like wouldn't, then that's an uninteresting question, because the answer is clearly yes. If what you mean is there anything that an atheist materialist would regard as a moral action that the religious person would do and an atheist materialist wouldn't do, then the answer is also probably uninterestingly no, right? Because if they're, if it's stuff that all parties agree is morally good to do, there probably are at least some people who do it, right? With all these worldviews. And then I think Rabbi Wolpe is also suggesting something that's like kind of right, which is, okay, if the question is not either could in the strict sense or like absolutely would not or whatever, but like, are there things that Christopher Hitchens and Rabbi Wolpe would agree are moral actions that you might be more likely to do if you're religious? Then I think the answer is probably yeah, right? I mean, that's like, it is actually does seem to be true. I mean, not as a matter of like logical connection between the two subjects or anything like that, but just as like a psychological issue. I think it probably is true that if you're, moral, if your sense of morality is like bound up with this sense of religious awe or whatever, then, that might actually help you, help inspire you to certain kinds of acts of moral heroism, right? That like, most people, whether religious or not religious, don't do, but like maybe people who do them are more likely to be religious. I mean, Hitchens' response, if he was on his game right now, would be okay, but there are also particularly evil things that you're more likely to do if you're religious. And then it seems like it's just an empirical question, right? We have to like measure. It's like, okay, for every religious person who, I don't know, goes, the example from the book, adopts a Ukrainian refugee who has HIV and, et cetera. How many are there who act like the mom and Carrie, right? And that's, again, like that's an empirical question. You'd have to count, and you have to start saying, okay, how many adoptions of Ukrainian refugees makes up for the Crusades? And I have no idea how you're supposed to answer any of these questions. I think the more interesting question is like, what, if anything, is like the conceptual connection between religion and morality. There I'm on like Team Hitchens. I think basically none, right? I think that, I think the Euthyphro problem comes up there and all that. People who don't know what I'm talking about can watch the debate with Charlie Kirk, but anyway, I know we do want to get through the last chunk of this, so we should probably go back to it. I just wanted to say, like, I do think if we're calling balls and strikes objectively, I don't think he's done particularly well before this, but I think Rabbi Wolpe was much better in this last section than Hitch was.
Yeah, the only thing I want to add real quick is I think they're kind of switching back and forth between the metaphysical argument and the, like, I don't know, sociological argument. Like, what is the role of religion in society. I don't know if sociological is the perfect term there, but you know what I mean. Much more, like you were saying, a much more pragmatic question. And I think maybe the moderator deserves a little bit of blame for not focusing the argument and letting them kind of just go back and forth. That said, I think they're just trying to entertain the audience. Yeah.
Well,
so,
well, let's
anyway.
do this next thing and continue the debate.
That is done precisely because of faith. You've already thought of one.
But any that,
Wait.
but any that someone who doesn't have
And
faith
now you-
couldn't do?
and now
Wait,
you've
tell me one that
No,
someone who
I
doesn't
didn't-
have
no.
faith could not do.
I didn't say that.
Okay, but that's exactly the point.
No, it's not.
A human being can do certain things, whether they're believers or not. They have the physical ability.
It still doesn't.
Believing something doesn't give you a
it's
new
to
physical
you,
ability.
It's no problem to you that the suicide murder community, the genital mutilation community, these are all faith-based communities.
Do you want
And
me to
while we're
answer
on the
that?
subject of charity, who doesn't hear Hamas saying, the reason we're loved by our people is because we provide social services. We help the needy. We're the only people who come out and do that, which is, by the way, I'm horrified to have to say is true. But do you excuse them for that because they're charitable?
Of course
No.
not.
Do you not think that they bless their children a whole lot?
Yes, and I
bet
think
you
that that's a
could-
beautiful
I've
thing
heard
that they
them
do.
it.
Right.
You try
But
being. You
I
try,
don't think-
try
I don't
being
think
a
they're-
Muslim children and not be the child not be blessed the entire time. That's part of the authority that they claim. They claim to
I
own these
wanna-
people.
I wanna
I'll
ask,
give it a
who's-
shot.
This is all faith-based.
Who steps up to, you won't like any of the language, but life has a lot of despair. People fall into despair. Who steps up to save? And I don't mean in Christian terms necessarily at all, but who steps up to reach out to those people? And for society as a whole, if you don't have the teaching of religion, what will offer a kind of moral construct? I don't see it in schools. Union halls are gone. Who's going to give people
I live in such a world.
structure of,
I live in such a
meaning?
world.
They're
It's
coming
called
back.
Hollywood. You see
Hollywood,
what happens.
well,
Yeah,
exactly. I mean,
right.
it may have blemishes. It may be deeply flawed. It may be.
I just wanted to say, because that's a little bit too good an opening not to. Just came down tonight. The hearing officer handling the objections for the Amazon JFK 8 facility in Staten Island has recommended the employer's objections be rejected in their entirety, and the Amazon labor union be certified as the bargaining representative. So,
Wow.
so yeah, I think that this debate happened in 2010. I think the death of the union halls was premature.
Yeah. And sorry. Here, let me add that real quick. I think both of you and I agree that if we had to choose between morality and society coming from a church or a union hall, we'd probably pick the union hall. No problem with religion in the union hall, but I definitely would pick that.
No, absolutely. Would in a heartbeat pick the union hall and actually think that I'm much more comfortable with the while we're talking about the connection between these things and morality, I think the impact on the justices of society of that is much like much more unambiguous than the church. But yeah.
But, yeah, I do like the moderator kind of saying, like, listen, if we have the union halls, and I get it, we don't need religion, but there's no union halls. So what's going to step in? Hollywood.
Fatally flawed, you would say, but what's the substitute? What's the structure for moral teaching and save the despairing?
I think despair is quite a good starting point myself. I mean, I think it's very good to know that we're born into a losing struggle. I think that the stoicism that comes from that and the reflection that comes from that is very useful. I'm not very impressed by people who say, well, I wish it wasn't true, so I'll try and act as if it isn't. It is true. Everything is governed by entropy and decline and annihilation and disaster. And you're born into a losing struggle, and because you're a primate mammal, you know you are, and you know you're going to die.
Existential.
And there'll be a lot of struggle and pain on the way. I don't want a world without anxiety and grief and pain and struggle. I can't get it.
No one's saying you
but
can't
those
have
who offer
that.
it to me, I spurn the gift. I don't want what you want. I don't want the feeling of eternal love and peace. Love and peace, very, very overrated in my view. One of the many reasons actually I should despise all religions equally, but I do in a way. But one way in which I prefer Judaism to its rivals is that the emphasis is more on justice than on love.
I want to go to the rabbi. Why is that not misanthropic of you? That attitude.
misanthropic. It doesn't mean I have to hate people.
Well,
It means I respect.
hard.
It means I respect them enough. It means I respect them enough not to offer them false consolation.
I do think it's important.
The realm of illusion will not help you to cure this condition.
I do think it's important to say that part of this is based in temperament, but also part of it is based in life experience. I spend a lot of my time at the bedside of people who are dying, with parents who lost children, with husbands who lost wives and wives who lost husbands. The sense of community that is created by religion, the sense that life is meaningful even if it's short, all of that, it's not trivial, it's not cheap consolation, it's not illusion. It goes to the depths of the questions that human beings ask themselves. And I know that you can make a clever remark about the cheap selling of religious consolation, but you know what? The remark gets melted by the heat of human anguish when you're standing beside the grave of a child who died and the mother is saying a prayer, and that brings her some measure of comfort because she really does believe that this world in some sense is meaningful and is not nihilistic and is not empty and is not foolish. And although I can't prove to you in an empirical sense that in fact the world is meaningful, at that moment, even as I question it, it seems to me the deepest instinct of my soul.
Well, if you'll, well, if you'll pardon me, I won't share any of my griefs with you. But I've never had one or known anyone who had one who's had the faintest consolation from religion, and indeed being told, as the Christians tell them, that they're off to a better place and so on. I think it's positively wicked thing to do. I think lying to the dying for a living, what self-respecting person can do that?
And you know it's a lie because, tell me how you know it's a lie, since you assert it again and again.
Because the person saying it cannot possibly know it to be true.
And therefore it's a lie.
They don't have access to information.
Even if they believe it, it's a lie.
Yes, it's a lie.
But how do we create, for those who aren't able or don't desire to walk around in despair or to walk around in irony, in a world that can bring plenty of despair? Try it, fine. But I think it's manifestly clear lots of people don't choose that. So what does atheism offer?
Well, it offers the chance of living without illusion, which I think, and it says that philosophy and literature will do a great deal more for you. There's a lot more morality in them. There's a lot more ethical discussion in Dostoevsky, say.
It may be true, but who will present them in our society, in a real society? Who will present them in a way to create structure?
For now, I'm presenting.
There he is.
For now, I'm presenting. I can't do...
You're going to be very busy.
I can only appear in my own person here. I can even say that to some extent it works for me. This irony, I think, is tremendously useful, as is philosophy, especially the philosophy of Spinoza, especially in times of anguish. And the realization that there's no false consolation can actually cheer you up. But once you face the fact that you're born into a losing struggle, things immediately appear a great deal more manageable in some ways. And really, of the remarks against this neighbor, not one of these remarks couldn't have been made by a devout member of the Muslim Brotherhood. And what I want to ask him is this: if anything of what he says is true, is he really saying that he would prefer me not to be myself, not to be an unbeliever, and someone who believes in irony and of the unillusioned world, but I'd be morally better off if I was a Wahhabi Muslim, for example.
Is me asking,
or a Roman Catholic.
Is he me?
Are you asking
this? Okay.
I mean, according to you, I would be a better person.
No, don't answer the question. You asked me the question. Right. You're not allowed to answer it for me.
You imply.
I imply.
I want to know if you really mean that.
Actually, I never said that you were automatically better off if you believed than you didn't believe. I think Christopher is very useful in the world because he forces religious people. I mean, he's useful for many, many reasons, obviously, to the world, but he also forces religious people to think seriously about their faith. And as I understand the God that I believe in and the God that Judaism presents, the first and primary demand is not belief. The first and primary demand is goodness. That's exactly what characterizes Judaism. And therefore, if you say to me, I'm a good person, but I don't believe, is it better that I would be a miserable person who believed? All I have to do is look at the sources and say, obviously not. Obviously, it's better for you to be who you are and to promote goodness in the world. That's exactly l'takeno olam b'malchut Shaddai is what the Jewish tradition teaches, to make the world better under the sovereignty of God. But notice the first clause in that is to make the world better. So if you do that, that's the primary demand of any faith that I think is worth its salt.
May we turn on that point to what Barry Schregg raised as an acute concern, that is violence. And the question of whether violence is integral to religion or exceptional and an offense to religion, or both or all three, violence and religion.
Okay, so I'm going to try to abbreviate this. There are two things to remember. First of all, most religious conflicts are not about religion. What you find is religions will fight when there's land, when there's power, when there's resources, when there's water, when there's money. It's very rare for a religious group, not inconceivable, very rare for a religious group to say, hey, guess what? There's someone halfway across the world who believes differently. Let's go get them. It's the people who live next door to us who are other than us, we should get them. And by the way, along the way, we're going to take their land and we're going to take their riches and we're going to take this. And that's because, and if you look in the Encyclopedia of War, which is probably not something that you peruse in your leisure hours, but if you do, you will see that it identified 1,763 wars since the beginning of time. 123 of them are identified as religious wars. When you take religion out of a society, you don't get a more peaceful society. We look at the 20th century. It was like a laboratory for that. Stalinism, Maoism, Nazism, Cambodia, North Korea versus South Korea, on and on and on and on. The fact is, the record of extracting religion is very poor. And the final point is this, which is, if you ask why religious people fight, the answer is clear. It's because they're people. I have a colleague, and not a rabbi, but a psychologist in Los Angeles who studies bullying. Do you know at what age bullying is most prominent? Think to yourself what age, and then I'll tell you the answer by far. The answer is preschool. Because we're not born all sweetness and light. It's why it's so much hard work to get a kid to be good. Right? Parents don't have to say to their child, why don't you share a little bit less? You know? Because you're too selfless, you're too kind. Instead, it's very hard work to get people to do well. What religions are known for is their attempt to make something straight of the crooked nature of human beings. And they fail again and again and again, exactly as you would expect if you know human nature. But that doesn't mean that the attempt to do it makes people worse. Quite the opposite, at least according to the evidence of history.
Well, violence, there's no mystery about violence. I mean, violence arises because we are primates, imperfectly evolved. Our prefrontal lobes are too small, our adrenaline glands are too big. There are various other deformities of this kind. Sexual organs designed by a committee, all the rest of it. And we're greedy, and
we're back to polytheism.
We're greedy and fearful, and covetous of other people's and also surprisingly, it's probably our biggest defect. Given that the reason we're so successful is there's almost no genetic difference between us. If we were dogs, we'd all be the same. Breed, there's fantastically little variation. But we're incredibly prone to tribalism and ethnic and racial, what Freud calls the narcissism of small differences. So, of course, if a tribe, let's say, that's calling itself the Children of Israel, for the sake of argument, decides that it should kill all the other tribes that get in its way, take their women as slaves, butcher their men, take their land, take their cattle, and so battle in this way across to Canaan and take everyone else's land and burn down there. That's going to happen whether there's a God or not, or whether there's religion or not, but it'll happen very much more intensely if they believe they have a mandate from heaven to do so. It's a terrific force multiplier. I think there would have been a quarrel between the Hutu and the Tutsi of Rwanda, say, once Belgian colonialism had established that there were these two different character groups, types, that is, the tribes. But it's a terrific force multiplier that the Catholic Church was as strong as it was in Rwanda, the most Christian country in Africa, made it infinitely worse. What makes the Israel-Palestine two-state solution ungettable? Because there's a chunk of people on both sides who say they have God in their corner and God gave only their group the land. And they can negate the votes of everybody else, including the whole of the international community, by the way, just because of their faith. Northern Ireland is the same. there would have been a Republican nationalist dispute. It's infinitely worse because of religion. So I think the corollary I'd like to hold would be that the less religion there was, the less violence there would be. But I can't in good Darwinian conscience say that. But I think the more that people refused orders that were divine, as for example, to take the preposterous allegation that the rabbi makes that the wars of the 20th century were secular wars, the belt buckle worn by every soldier in the Nazi army that says Gott mit uns, God on our side. I don't think that was a help, do you? Things were bad enough as they were. On page 70, I think it is, of Mein Kampf, Hitler says that in taking on the filthy virus of Judaism, I know I'm doing the work of the Lord, and I'm summoned by the Lord to do this work. A book, one of the very few books the Vatican didn't ban in that period, by the way. I don't think that was a help either. So I'd say, on the whole, we'd be better off without the belief either in a supreme dictator, because that leads to violence, or the idea that God takes sides in our pathetic mammalian disputes.
I want to just, as a coda to this, when you say that we shouldn't take orders, I just want to remind you of a long history. For example, the abolition of slavery was almost entirely the work of people who believed they were taking orders from something higher than societal orders. Wilberforce in England, here, Beecher and John Brown and so on, they believed they were doing God's work by abolishing slavery. And it's interesting that the abolition of slavery was a Christian movement, but the idea is it's not an issue of who you take orders from. It's an issue of the orders you take. That's the issue. And it comes down in part to what kind of religion you practice, not whether you practice religion.
Comrades, I'm sorry.
Comrades, what kind of orders you take.
Brothers and sisters.
That's better.
Comrades, right. I suppose it is somewhat to the credit of some Christians that in the waning decades of thousands of years of slavery that were biblically mandated, some of them belatedly joined things like the American Anti-Slavery Society, stars of which were Thomas Paine, Benjamin Franklin, non-believers, right? Whereas to the last day of the Confederacy, the flag of the Confederacy said Deo Vindice, God on our side. And every justification for that slavery came from the Bible, where indeed it's not hard to find.
We're going to take questions from the audience in about 1 minute. There are microphones. If you have questions, make your way, and we will take them very shortly.
All right. Well, before we go any further, I want to try to do better, because I've been this entire time I've just been drinking a beer, but this is we just finished watching an hour of Christopher Hitchens. I should have some Johnny Walker now. Hitchens drank Johnny Walker Black. What I seem to have in the house right now is some promotional thing called Johnny Walker, a Song of Fire. But I will I'll have a sip of that.
Classy.
Yeah.
Well, I'm drinking the on my end. I'm drinking the traditional drink of the Jews, which is seltzer from New York City, pure New York City seltzer in honor of David.
Yeah. I think I agree with Daniel. I think Hitchens finished strong, right? I actually think that last minute or two might have been his best minute or two of that debate.
I think he sobered up.
That is entirely possible.
He was only sipping. He was not drinking the alcohol replacement was not enough from the wine he was sipping. Yeah. But I think that when they were discussing the role of religion in history, that was just a much more fruitful, interesting discussion than their metaphysical part. That was just I think the two parts I liked were the role of religion in history, and then also the role of religion personally, because I did think that the rabbi spoke pretty movingly about what it's like to pray when you're lost, and I just think it was an interesting question. It gets to deep questions of existentialism, for example, is kind of seemed to me mostly drawing upon, right? Like kind of facing the absurdity, but different ways to tackle life's most difficult issues. I found both of I found it interesting to hear how both of their perspectives on that. You know what I mean? And that wasn't much of a debate even. It was much just hearing their positions. And I thought that was a lot more. I thought the second half was a lot more interesting than the first half for that reason.
Yeah, completely agree. I think that I think it was just more comfortable terrain. I think like Hitchens seemed really proud of that line that I've heard him use before in other contexts about the I have no choice but to believe in free will. It's like okay, that's cute. I don't know what that's supposed to have to do with anything, but thank you for that. Like that doesn't really seem to move the debate along in any way that I can see. But yeah, I think I completely agree. I think the historical and moral discussion was way more fruitful than the discussion about free will and arguments for the existence of God, on which I don't think either of them had anything interesting to say whatsoever. I think that I do think Rabbi Wolpe still had, even though I think the slavery part was actually probably Hitchens' best part, I do still think Rabbi Wolpe had half a point that again, I think that there's a sort of, you think about John Brown, right? Stuff like that. I mean, I think there is probably a kind of moral heroism that maybe non-coincidentally often goes with intense religiosity, that's a thing that happens. I'm not saying it's the only thing that can inspire it, because I think that's clearly not true, right? I think you have I don't know, totally secular, I mean, there are plenty of times and situations where you have I don't know, totally secular, communists, being tortured by fascists and not giving anybody up, and going around doing things in secret to help everybody in the prison camp, and then walking to the firing squad singing the Internationale, right? So it's there's clearly some kind of parallel there, right? But but it is a thing that can inspire, right? And I mean, I think that even to the extent that you really do play up the religiosity of abolitionists, I mean, my question, and somebody said something similar in the chat, right, is if we're to argue about philosophy mode, right, if we're in just sort of practical political organizing mode, then whatever, I'll take your John Browns and and happily work with them, right, or their equivalents. But if we're to argue about philosophy mode, I would just say, okay, but let's assume that's true. But if you think God commanded you to oppose slavery, which, by the way, I think Hitchens probably has a stronger case to be made there, that the Bible sure seems pro-slavery, right? I mean, it has rules in it about how to do slavery. There are points where, I don't know, Israelites are even commanded to, take slaves from, groups that they're conquering and stuff like that, so, but even if you do believe that God is commanding you to oppose slavery, it's okay, but is the only reason that you're opposed to slavery that you happen to think that God is against it? If it turned out, if there was a divine clarification that, the skies open up and it's just for the record, I'm actually totally okay with this, right? Then would you still find slavery objectionable? I hope so.
Yeah. I mean, I think that it's all interesting questions in terms of the ways in which religion have affected society is also historically contingent, right? And from I guess a materialist standpoint, also there's not something essential necessarily about religion that makes humans act a certain way. There probably are there are tendencies that come from the type what religious thought does to a person versus to a society, right? These are all interesting questions, but they don't really have much to do with whether God exists, right? Because there could be a perfect. I mean, it's totally possible that I mean, they have a lot to do with whether like a super interventionist God exists, which I think both of it seems like David was kind of ceding. It's not really what he was. He never argued for like, yeah, like you pray to God to like, for the Yankees to win, and then the Yankees are going to win. He didn't seem to be arguing anything like that. In which case, you're, or at least he didn't really go into that. But he didn't really present anything like that. But anyway, yeah, those are all interesting questions, right? Which kind of is more what they're getting into at the end. But there could be a perfectly, good moral God in the deist sense, and all the religious people could be just completely fucking up what he wanted, right? Like they could just be acting selfishly, even though the religion is completely real, right? Those questions are completely orthogonal to each other, I think.
No, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, it could be. I mean, I don't even think this is true, but I mean, it could be that like religion has a unambiguously really good effect on society, but as a matter of fact, all of its metaphysical claims are wrong, right? I mean, I think Patton Oswalt has a joke somewhere where he's like, look, if you think there's like a giant like sky asshole that will suck you up into it if you're not like really kind and charitable all the time, then I guess I hope people believe it. That's and conversely, it could be true that religion has an unambiguously negative effect on society. That like that the like moral effects of religion are really bad, but also but also it just so happens that God exists, right? And that like the Bible is His word and all that stuff, right? I mean, like that one's a little bit harder to make sense of because it's like, at least with the Bible as His word part, because it's like, okay, but then why wouldn't a perfectly good God have try harder to make sure that people act that people like that the message was clearer, right? But then they're all the sort of Hitchens in points you make about like you're giving all these commandments, right? There's the main 10. There are 603 others in Judaism. Like don't practice slavery is not one of them, right? It's like, that's a weird omission, right? Like, wouldn't you think that an even kind of okay being, never mind a perfectly good one, would be like, oh, just to be clear, you can't own people, right? Like that seems like that would, come closer to the top of the moral priority list. But yeah, I mean, either of those are possible. And I also think that the correct sort of historical materialist position is kind of that like, how much of the good or bad stuff is really caused by religion per se, right? Like how much of it is just caused by, the class interests that are set in motion by the development of the forces of production over the course of history, and various ideologies, including religious ones, are convenient, to rationalize it at different times. And then, that just leaves us with the question of, okay, but like what is actually morally good or bad? And then I think the Euthyphro stuff is pretty decisive that like, that's just a separate question from the religious stuff. So that would be my take. But yeah, Hitchens, sobering up near the end, had a good couple minutes on slavery. If he'd been like sticking with just the wine for like 10 or 20 more minutes, he might have even unbuttoned his coat.
Well, he made a reference to his like midsection with the belt, and I was like, come on, your hand is right there. Just unbutton that button. Oh man. They rallied, so and so did we. So but I agree with you, Ben.
Yeah, fair enough. All right, well, let's call it there for tonight. On Monday, we are going to be back. Going to do a debate episode. There have been too many GTA episodes in a row where I've had on guests who I agree with. So got to mix it up a little bit. So we've got Sora Bamari, who has kind of an unusual combination of views. So it should be an interesting discussion, but is a very conservative person. So there'll be very little agreement, at least or at least there is a certain very wide and important range of issues on which there'll be very little agreement. So it should be an interesting discussion. And then for the debate breakdown next week, we're going to be there is Andrew, a different Andrew than the one who's on the show, is going to come on, and we're going to talk about Sam Cedar versus Larry Sharp. So good stuff coming up. I don't know.
I'm on the post game for patrons. I think it's going to mark a year of me being involved with the show.
Oh,
so
yeah.
we might. That's going to be, it's big. It's big stuff. So we might toast to that. Yeah, actually, it's funny because the first time I was on the show was a debate breakdown just under a year ago. Charlie Kirk versus Hassan. You were preparing for the Charlie Kirk debate. So I'm glad that we snuck another one in. This was actually much more enjoyable than that debate. So even for all its faults, right?
That is very fair. I think that one was well, anyway, it was what it was, but for my money, the second best Charlie Kirk debate was the Kyle Kalinske one. If people want to check another one out, but yeah, we will definitely do a toast to the post game to Jake's full year on the show, which I think actually makes him the longest lasting GTAA producer.
You're putting a hex on me right now. It's like when players at the free throw line and they bring up the free throw percentage. That's a hex. But I know we don't normally last long, so every day is a gift.
That's right, exactly. GTA producers are like Spinal Tap drummers. But, and it's been fantastic. Hope there are many years more of that. But yeah, we should call it a night, and leave it there. Left is best.